Let me ask you a question. Not a rhetorical one, but a real one. The kind that deserves to sit with you for a while. What kind of ancestor will you be? Not what kind of person, not what kind of activist or donor or community leader, but what kind of an ancestor will you be? Because every choice we make right now, how we spend our energy, our time, how we direct our resources, where we direct our resources, what story we tell about who we are, well, it's already being written into the inheritance we leave behind, our legacy. Today on this episode 16 at the Anchors of Hope, we're going to examine that question through the lens of a man who understood it almost better than anyone else in our history. Well, certainly over the last 2,000 years. His name was Theodor Herzl, and 130 years ago, he published a small book, a pamphlet of sorts, that changed not only our world, but the world. The year is 1896. The Jewish people are, by almost every measure, on the defensive, being chased and hunted. The Dreyfus Affair had just torn France apart. A Jewish military officer, falsely convicted of treason, publicly stripped of his rank before screaming crowds, chanting, "Death to the Jews." Pogroms are burning through Eastern Europe. Emancipation has promised equality, but delivered a new and sophisticated form of hatred, a political anti-Semitism laundered in the language of nationalism and science and progressiveness. A Viennese journalist, secular Jew, by the name of Theodor Herzl, well, he's watching all of this. As a journalism, he's trying to record the story, trying to follow how it unfolds. And here is what makes him extraordinary. He refuses to simply fight back. He could have written pamphlets defending Jewish honor. He could have organized boycotts and petitioned governments and had people sign letters and demanded protection. And there were plenty of others who were doing exactly that. Instead, Herzl does something almost incomprehensible given the moment, given the attack Jews are experiencing. He looks forward. Herzl publishes Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state, and it casts an anchor not into the defensive present, not into the wonder of why are the Jews being hated and how do we fight anti-Semitism, but into a future that doesn't exist yet. A future with a Jewish homeland, Jewish sovereignty, Jewish normalcy. Herzl writes with almost breathtaking confidence, and we all know this one, if you will it, it is no dream. Im tirtzu, ein zo agada. He writes a vision for the future, which is actually, it's an action plan. It's a business plan for how it's going to unfold. How will his idea be manifested? Yes, he was mocked. He was mocked by rabbis who said the Messiah hadn't come yet, by assimilated Jews who said it was dangerous, by Zionists who said it was premature, by everyone essentially who was too busy reacting to what was to imagine what could be. Herzl died in 1904. 8 years after this business plan, this pamphlet was written, he was only 44 years old, and without seeing a single stone laid. But in his diary, after the first Zionist Congress in Basel of 1897, he wrote something that still stops me and anyone who reads this quote to think. And he says, "In Basel I founded the Jewish state. If I were to say this today, I would be greeted by universal laughter. In 5 years, perhaps, and certainly in 50, everyone will see it." Well, 51 years later, on May 14th, 1948, David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, declared the state of Israel. Herzl's anchor had held. Now here we are 130 years after Herzl's vision, 78 years after its realization, after the dreams have been actualized, and living inside the dream of our ancestors who dared to cast forward. I want to ask us something, and let's be honest. What are we doing with that dream? What are we doing with the anchor that has been cast forward into our time, projected into the future? Because if you look at how the organized Jewish community, to a certain extent, in the diaspora and around the world and here in Israel, spends its collective energy, its financial resources, its institutional bandwidth, its most talented young people, there is some, well, to a certain extent, a disturbing pattern that emerges. We are living reactively. After October 7th, there was an explosion of anti-Semitism on campuses, in the streets, and in the media. And the communal response was swift and massive. Counter-demonstrations, rapid response communications teams, combating anti-Semitism task forces, Israel advocacy training, legal challenges, billions of dollars mobilized, thousands of staff hours redirected. And look, I get it. I understand it. I feel it. When we are under attack, when anyone is under attack, well, we want to respond. We react. It's an instinct. It comes from a place of love and care, and that is legitimate. But here's what it costs us. And I want us to look at this directly, and I want us to look at this clearly, because every dollar we spend in reactive mode is a dollar not invested in Jewish literacy, in next generation leadership, in forward thinking, in building the kind of deep rooted Jewish identity that doesn't need to be defended because it is lived, in creating the communities and institutions that make people want to be Jewish, not because they're afraid of anti-Semitism, but because Jewish life is wondrous. It's beautiful. It's meaningful. It's amazing. And every hour we take the best and brightest and spend time learning how to answer hostile questions on Twitter and on other social media platforms. Well, it's an hour that we're not spending learning about Jewish history, identity, Torah, values, philosophy, the Jewish library, building businesses, writing music, having families, deepening friendships, being active members in our communities, doing the things that are actual substance of a people's life, of Am Yisrael's life. And here's the deeper wound, if you will. Reactive living erodes identity from the inside. When the primary story you tell about being Jewish is persecution and how we're hated, when your Jewish calendar runs on crisis rather than on Shabbat or celebrating holidays, when your children learn what it means to be Jewish primarily through the lens of who hates you, when you change your name from Jewish sounding to other, you're not building Jewish identity. You're building Jewish anxiety. You are raising a generation that knows exactly why people want to destroy us, but isn't quite sure why it's worth being saved, why it's worth living Jewishly. Herzl got this. He got it back then. He didn't write Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state, as a response to anti-Semitism per se. He wrote it as a solution to it. And the solution wasn't to defeat the anti-Semites. It was to build something so vivid, so real, so alive that the anti-Semites became irrelevant. The anchor he threw wasn't a defensive one. It was a generative one. It was one towards creation, towards manifesting a shared collective destiny that would be better. He asked not how do we survive this, but what do we want to become? And those are fundamentally different questions. And they lead to fundamentally different communities, and ways of life. So let me return to where we began. What kind of ancestor will you be? Because this is not an abstract question. It is a design question. It is a budget question. It is a question about what you put on your calendar and what you take off it, about where your federation directs its campaign, about what your day school actually teaches and what values it role models. It's about what story your family tells their children at every holiday, and every Shabbat, and every Passover Seder, in every conversation that you have, and how you role model Jewish life. Our ancestors, and I mean this literally, they cast anchors forward. They projected forward for us. They couldn't know us. They couldn't see us. But they built institutions, preserved texts, maintained practices, made sacrifices, held on to something they couldn't fully articulate except to say, someone is coming after us. And let us leave them something worth holding on to, worth arriving to, worth being a part of. We remember the story in the Talmud, and we all remember this story, and if you don't, then it's an interesting one. It's about Choni HaMa'agel, this character, Choni, who sees an old man planting a carob tree, and Choni asks him, how long until this tree bears fruit? And the man, the planter, says, well, approximately 70 years. And Choni says, do you expect to live another 70 years and eat its fruit? Are you going to benefit from this investment? And the man looks at him and he simply says, I found carob trees in the world because my ancestors planted them for me. And so I'm planting these for my children, for my future. I have set the future before me always. The man is our model, not the one marching in protest, though sometimes that is necessary, not the one defending the carob trees from those who would cut them down, if you will, though sometimes that too is necessary, but primarily and fundamentally, the man or the woman, the one planting our trees. Herzl planted, his generation planted for our future. They planted knowing that they wouldn't eat of the fruit. They planted because that's what ancestors do. So the question is, where are we casting ours? What are the anchors that we're casting forward? So here's what I want to ask of all of us, of your communities, of our institutions. Let's shift the investment. Not all of it. We're not naive. Security matters. Advocacy matters. Legal defense matters. So I'm not talking about disarming ourselves, but I am wondering about an examination or examining the ratio. Where does our funding go? Our time, our resources, and to ask whether the balance between defensive, reactionary approaches to life and proactive or visioning, well, do they reflect our values or just our fears of what awaits us? What would it look like if Jewish federations and other agencies allocated even 20% more of their campaign to vision forward initiatives, to Jewish Renaissance projects, to immersive Israel education that isn't just about fighting BDS or advocacy training, but about falling in love with our culture, Jewish culture, Israeli culture, literature, innovation, music, food, our history, to programs that help global Jewry build genuine relationships with Israelis and with Israel, the land, the place, not the politics. I'm not talking about political points that we need to make or defend, but as a family, to youth leadership that doesn't just train advocates, but forms human beings with depth and character and Jewish literacy. What would it look like if our best institutional minds were asked not just how do we respond to this crisis, but what kind of Jewish world do we want to exist in 50 years? What does it look like? And what do we want to build today to make that a reality? Herzl didn't win by defeating anti-Semitism. There still is anti-Semitism. There'll always be anti-Semitism. Herzl won by making Jewish sovereignty a reality. He made the dream so concrete, so grounded, so anchored in a future worth wanting and looking forward to and building towards, that history bent towards it. That's the work. And it's available to us right now in 2026, 130 years after the publication of Der Judenstaat. We live in Herzl's fulfilled prophecy indeed. We owe it to him and to that generation, to our ancestors, and to those who will come after us, to cast our anchor just as far ahead as we can. And so on this 130th anniversary of Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state, let's think about practice. Let's write it down, literally. Let's take 5 minutes this week and write one sentence, just one, that begins with, I'm planting this for those who come after me. Well, what is that? It could be about your family. It could be your children. It could be your parents. It could be your community. It could be your social network. It could be your friends. It could be your giving. It could be your learning, your Israel relationship, your Jewish practice. One sentence that casts it forward, an anchor into our future, because that is what Herzl and his generation did. Not with certainty. There is no certainty. There is no guarantee. But with stubborn, visionary, and audacious conviction that the future was worth building toward. That even if Herzl would never arrive there himself, well, it was worth it. Im tirtzu ein zo agada. If you will it, it is no dream. Let us will this next chapter in Jewish sovereignty, for the history of Am Yisrael, for the ancestors upon whose shoulders we stand, and see that much further ahead. And let us ask ourselves, what kind of ancestors will we be? Thank you for joining me here at episode 16 at the Anchors of Hope, sending you love and light from Israel. And remember, Am Yisrael Chai, it's not just a slogan, it's a way of life. Till next time, everyone.